I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's go to the next slide. This morning, you've got a group of folks who are going to be talking to you about WordPress 5.0 and Gutenberg. So I'm Joanna Pineda. I'm CEO and Chief Troublemaker here at Matrix Group, and I think I know most of you. But today I'm joined by a couple of, actually several staff members, Jamie Quiroz, who's actually my lead front-end developer, Joseph Parsley, who's one of my front-end developers, and Kevin Van Avery, who's a senior consultant here at Matrix Group. And so we're going to talk to you about Gutenberg, really, and hopefully show you a lot of stuff behind the browser, or on the back-end side. So let's go to the next slide. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. So as always, if you've ever been on a Matrix Group webinar, know that we've muted everyone. If you've got questions, go back to the Q&A tab in Zoom, and I have Russ monitoring the questions, so he'll let us know if there are questions. Feel free to type questions as we go, and if it's appropriate, he'll interrupt us. We will also have time at the end to answer your questions. We will be sending a copy of the slides and a recording within the next couple of days, so that you can share this with your staff. You can rewatch the recording, because at the end of it, we're going to ask you some questions about the decisions that you'll want to make with regard to the editor and with regard to Gutenberg. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with Matrix Group, I think most of you are. Most of you are clients, but we do have some folks who have come in and aren't just familiar with the organization. So we are a digital agency. We're based here in Arlington, Virginia, although we have staff around the country. We work almost exclusively with associations and nonprofits, and they hire us to help them solve these 4 problems. Increase membership or stem some kind of decline, work on their membership retention. Maybe you've got churn, or maybe you're really looking for increased engagement from your members. Many of our clients are in the midst of rebranding, and they really want to make it very clear to their different target audiences who they are, who they serve, what they do, how they make the world a better place. And then finally, we have many, many projects where clients are saying, look, I've got a lot of disparate systems and I really need help kind of tying it all together so that it really results in just a lot more staff productivity. The systems talking to each other, whether it's single sign-on or just, how do we make things, much simpler for the staff. Next slide. So we do all of this through these services. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but if you're in the midst of a website redesign, we hope you'll give us a call. If you are rebranding and thinking about how you want to present your organization in the future, if you're looking for a new membership database, or maybe you're just looking for a new strategy and you're saying, how can we do things differently so that we are a more high impact organization and our members go from being members to really being joyful and delighted members, we hope you'll give us a call. These are our different services. So, all right, so first let me give you a little bit of background on this webinar. So for Matrix Group, we do a lot of helping clients. It's kind of our bread and butter. It's really helping clients with their website, their overall digital strategy, and then as part of the website development or redesign, we'll implement or re-implement or move them to a new content management system. We work in a variety of platforms. We do, on the .NET side, we do a lot of work with Sitefinity. On the open source side, we do a lot of work with WordPress. And our WordPress business is actually growing. Just because we have some clients that actually come to us and say, we'd like to implement in WordPress, or for a variety of reasons, WordPress just seems to make sense. We also have clients that will utilize WordPress because they've got maybe a campaign site or a microsite that they'd like to implement in WordPress. And so because it's open source, it's lightweight, there's no licensing, it just becomes a really good choice for some of these smaller sites. So I guess at some point over the summer, the folks behind WordPress said, hey, we're going to make Gutenberg, the new editor, part of core with the 5.0 release. If you've done any reading on Gutenberg, you'll know that the community is a little bit split on Gutenberg. In fact, there's an article in today's Associations Now email newsletter that talks about Gutenberg and how, some folks aren't entirely enamored of it. And I'll tell you, and I hope it becomes obvious from today's webinar, that we actually are fans of Gutenberg. We think that for us, it will make our work easier, and we think that it'll make the job for you all as clients and WordPress users, much better. It will save you time. So we're big fans, but to be honest, we're also big fans of the folks behind WordPress, and we're in love with the community, and we trust the community, and we feel like, this is something that we should embrace. We're always embracing change anyway. But knowing that Gutenberg is going to introduce a lot of change on the back end, we wanted to be proactive and say, and really show clients what Gutenberg is, how it works, how it's going to change the experience of editing and managing content. Why is Gutenberg a big deal? What's the new functionality available to you? What's the impact on your site? How to keep using the classic editor if you want to stay there, and then kind of what's the next step. And one of the questions we will ask you if you're a client is, do you want to switch to the new Gutenberg editor? And we'll talk about that transition at the end of this webinar. And we'll talk about the different ways that we can support you in the transition to Gutenberg. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about what is Gutenberg. So, and Jamie, maybe you can help me out here. It's really a new editor coming to 5.0 that's designed to allow for more flexibility, simplicity, and a better user experience. So Jamie, maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit since you've been working in Gutenberg.
Yeah, so as we'll highlight in some of the future slides coming up, yeah, it's really just about the content editing experience. So historically or currently we have like this WYSIWYG editor where basically all the content for a page or a post is handled. Now there's a lot of like content entry aspects that Gutenberg speaks to as far as reordering content, adding content, removing content, rich text media, embeds, all sorts of things. It just makes it a lot easier with a improved UI. And that's pretty much what Gutenberg offers in a nutshell.
So just a little bit of background on it. It was named after Gutenberg, Johannes Gutenberg, the inventor of the printing press. And as we'll show you in a second, it really is a little bit of a different experience from the standard WordPress editor. If you're familiar with it, and hopefully most of you are, you've got the visual editor and you've got the text editor. And if you're just entering content, you go into the visual editor. If you want to start going into the, adding embed codes, putting in some special stuff, then you go into the HTML view. And with Gutenberg, you're going to do much more drag and drop, which really I think is kind of, symptomatic of the times that we're in. It's the type of experience that we think most users are going to be interested in anyway. Now, Jamie, when is this launching? It was supposed to launch earlier this month, but they've pushed it. And at this point, we don't know when it's launching, right? Is that the case?
Yeah, it's still TBD. We don't know. They're working out some kinks, doing some testing. So yeah, they pushed it back like twice already, so we really don't know when it's going to happen. They're saying sometime December, possibly January, something like that. So. Okay.
So, but you'll get a sneak peek. And for those of you who say, wow, based on this webinar, we think it's just awesome, Gutenberg is actually already available, right? Mm-hmm. It has been a plugin available, but with 5.0, it's going to be part of core. So if you, for example, have a new site that Matrix Group is going to be working on for you, chances are we're going to do it in Gutenberg. But for those of you with existing sites, as we'll talk about later, we are going to keep you on the classic editor until you tell us to move you to Gutenberg. So, and that's part of our managed services. Go ahead. All right, so let's talk about, what's the big fuss with Gutenberg and what's the new functionality available to you. All right, so Jamie, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, so drag and drop content blocks. So yeah, pretty much the idea is that it gives you a better user interface for, I would say, organizing your content, adding content, deleting content. So you're able to add images, media, pretty much kind of the same way that you currently do, although now you're able to do it in a specific section a lot easier, as opposed to, you know, wherever your cursor is, that's where it'll drop an image into. And sometimes you didn't realize that, like it's kind of unexpected. You didn't realize your cursor was at a certain place, and so you had to like undo it, or you know, redo it, or go into the HTML view and like move around an image tag or something like that. So that's kind of annoying. So yeah, with blocks, you know, it's more UI driven, more drag and drop, a lot easier for content editors to work with their page content and post content. So yeah, new interface, tags, categories. A lot of functionality is still going to be there, albeit maybe in a different location slightly, but all pretty much still there. It's really just you could think of it as as the WYSIWYG 2.0. You know, Gutenberg, that's what it is really. It's just a revamped, improved interface for your content. Yeah, and then we got columns. That's kind of a new feature that everyone's excited about.
Big deal,
you know, typically, right? What's that?
This is a big deal. Columns are a pain in WordPress.
No, yeah. Like I was gonna say, like, you know, plugins. Some of you might have used a plugin like Site Origin, or any kind of like page builder like Divi or something like that. And like really the primary purpose or why most people use that is because they want to add, they want to put their content into different columns, 2 columns, 3 columns, whatever it is. So that typically seems to be like the main use case for those plugins. And it's really overkill because they come with a lot of functionality, but really most people just want to put their text in 3 columns. And so Gutenberg does that out of the box, and it's really nice.
Awesome. So just a couple more slides, and then we're going to go to the back end. So let's go to the next slide. So Joseph, why don't you talk about what we no longer have to do, because it's pretty exciting.
Right. So doing stuff like YouTube, and so YouTube has reasonably easy embeds in WordPress, but like there's a lot of built-in embed codes like Facebook. You can embed a tweet with just copying the tweet URL, paste it into WordPress. That's it. You don't have to get some special embed code. Most of that's built in already. You can easily create tables, which is something that WordPress and a lot of CMSs, to be honest, struggle with. Cutting and pasting, you don't have to do that anymore. So like essentially it creates paragraphs and stuff for you, so that if you later decide, oh, I need to move this paragraph, you know, above this other paragraph, you can just drag and drop it. You don't have to, you know, rearrange everything manually in a text editor. And you typically won't have to use any kind of, you won't need to be adding classes as much, because for things like special links that you want to make a button, you can have there's a WordPress block that will just let you add a button.
This is a big deal. You no longer have to do a short code or HTML view to add a styled link. So if in one of my blog posts, for example, I wanted to have a click here or read more or register, it's kind of a little bit of a deal to make it green, right, and a button. But you no longer have to do that with Gutenberg.
Not as much. There's some cases where you might, but there's also a lot of built-in stuff that will help you, so you don't have to do that. Like you can definitely put in buttons that'll just be, you click on the block that says button, you type in the text, you add a link, and that's it. You don't have to go mess with the code for it.
Boy, and that's great news, because what we have found, and certainly from the research, is that if you've got a call to action on a page, making it a contrasting color button is going to really draw a person's eye to it, as opposed to these hidden links, you know, within the text, or a click here, or you have to hover over it to see that it's an underline. It makes it, you know, nice and easy to call out that action that you want people to take.
Right. So also a big thing is reusable custom blocks. So essentially, whenever you put in the content for a block, you can click a little thing that will show in the demo that will let you save it, and you can just at any time when you're adding a block, choose from your reusable block. So if you have text that you put in a lot of places, some kind of boilerplate or just a description, and it doesn't just have to be text, like any kind of configured block can be saved and then just reused infinitely. And it's really nice. We already talked about blocks for buttons and tables. Access to theme colors from within the editor. So a lot of the blocks have color configurations that you can do, and we can customize them for you to make it so that your brand colors are what's available, so that you can limit what colors that editors can use in the back end, and that way, you can make sure that you're consistent across the whole site with what colors you're using.
It also means that people don't have to remember the RGB
Right. You
numbers.
don't have to remember the hex code or
hex
the RGB
code, you know,
or copy and
9933
paste
or whatever.
from a Word doc that you have somewhere on your computer.
Well, I think
we've all been there.
Well, I think the other thing there also is that basically, you know, like you said, you can keep the style of the website, but also you can make sure that it's really easy for the editors to really add kind of some pizzazz to the pages. I'm really excited about the reusable content blocks. For those of you that are familiar with Sitefinity, which is another content management system that we use, there's a concept in Sitefinity of reusable widgets. And we'll show this in a second, but say you've got a content type called news. If you want to display news throughout the site, it's a little bit of coding. You've got to, currently with the editor, you've got to do some PHP coding, but if we create a custom block for news or create a custom block for testimonials or create a custom block for any of the different post types that you have, now as a WordPress editor on the back end, on the staff side, you can reuse this content.
Right. So there's a lot of applications for it. Like if we create a very special sort of thing and there's a lot of configuration involved, we can just save that and then it's available to you. In addition, if you are doing something over and over again and you find yourself using the same block a lot, you can just save it and then you'll have it available to you at any time.
And Joseph, the blocks still require a little bit of coding, so chances are we'll create the block for you because it requires some coding, but you'll be able to reuse it, as opposed to with a current editor where to have a content display of news, for example, across the site, you need a little bit of PHP on every single page. So this way, you really have a lot more power, but we still need coding to create those custom blocks.
Right. So there are definitely, any kind of special custom treatment is still probably going to require programming, but even without the custom stuff, you can reuse the basic parts as well.
And from our experience so far with Gutenberg, creating these reusable content blocks or reusable custom blocks will take less time, and therefore that's going to be less expensive for you as clients. So I think
yeah, so before we get to impact on current themes and plugins, we're going to have a little bit of a demo.
Yes, so we're going to go into the back end, and AALL, one of our clients, the American Association of Law Libraries, has very graciously allowed us to go into their back end. We're not going to show any protected content, but what we did is we went ahead and installed the Gutenberg plugin on the back end side of AALL.org, and so we're going to show you Gutenberg.
All right. So those of you familiar with the normal WordPress editor will notice that this looks very different at first glance from that.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, let's go to a completely new page so you can see what that looks like. I already filled in the title, but this might look a little confusing if you're not familiar with it. So when you come to a new page, you'll just have this open area that lets you add the title, where normally it's like a separate pulled out field. So they wanted to go with a very, subdued kind of text editor experience. So we can add another Gutenberg test page as our title. Now you can see right beneath that it has a message saying start writing or type to choose a block. So you could just start writing your text here. So, if you wanted to do some lorem ipsum text here, then you could do that. You can also, when you select where that is, you can see this little plus sign right here, and that's where you can choose different kinds of blocks. So if you just start typing in any given area, it'll assume you're just doing normal paragraph text, and it will automatically add paragraph blocks for you. And there's a neat little feature. Let me get my handy dandy lorem ipsum text here. So I've got two paragraphs I'm pasting from somewhere else, and it's loading a little slowly. There we go. And I've got two paragraphs I'm pasting from somewhere else. I've pasted in. You can actually see that it could tell that I had two paragraphs here, and it separated them into two separate blocks automatically.
And that'll do that automatically.
Yes. Okay. And so the reason that that's important is that if you decide you want to get rid of one paragraph, you don't have to find it in the text, and then you have to delete it. You can just come to the block, and if I don't want this paragraph anymore, I can come here. And so we've got our little widget controls here, and they're pretty streamlined. They try to limit it to the ones that you need. And these three dots here have some more options. So you can, hide the settings, you can duplicate a block, you can insert blocks before or after. And down here, it says add to reusable blocks. So this is what we were talking about before. So if I like this first lorem ipsum paragraph, and I know I do, Let's click on Add to Reusable Blocks. It'll ask me to give it a name. So
Joseph, let me interrupt you there. So if you have an about paragraph that you put at the bottom of things, like the little blurb about your association, you can make that a reusable block.
Right. So you just give it a name that'll help you remember it. So, which I clearly have already done at least once. So let's call it Lorem Ipsum paragraph 2. Click on Save. And then it'll show me that it's, it'll have this header here to show me that it's a reusable block. And it actually, you can edit it, but you can see that only edits the title. So once you set it to a reusable block, it's going to save it in the state it's in. You can edit it, so I'll show you how to do that as well. That's actually a little bit more involved. If you go up here, there's a place where you can manage the reusable blocks. But that's a little bit too much detail for this presentation.
But Joseph, let me ask you a question. If I have a reusable block and say it's kind of elevator pitch content about Matrix Group, and that's reused across the site. If I make a change to it in the Manage Block section, will that change it across the site?
I believe so. I don't think we've done a ton of testing
on that. We haven't tested that.
But if you come in here to edit blocks, you can see that it saves the block like sort of in its own post.
Yep.
And then it'll let you come change it. I believe that to be the case, that if you edit it, it should update it wherever it's been saved, because there's only essentially one version of it.
Right.
But
so clients think about creating reusable blocks of the blurb content about your association, but maybe you've got bios for people who are always being, talked about or mentioned or authoring, so you can have like the little blurb about, your CEO, for example, so that you can reuse it.
So you can also very easily rearrange these. So if I click on this block, you'll see over here on the left, there's a couple controls. So it has a little like dots thing that you can see I turn into a hand when I hover over it. So if I grab onto that, I can sort of drag it around and rearrange them. It also has arrows. So like you can just click on that, move down, and it will move it down to below the next block. As far as rearranging things goes, also, if you hover over some blocks, you can see, like, if I hover over this one, I can click below it to, like, try and add another block, or if you're in a paragraph, you can just hit Enter, and it'll automatically skip to a new block for you. But if I hover over the top of it and click on this Add block, and let's say we want to add a heading there, it will actually, last time it added above it. Well, it's easy to rearrange, but I think it's just up at the top so that it's easy to not get interrupted by something else. And clicking on that other block is another introduction to a block you'll use a lot, which is the heading. So if we want to add a subheading here, you just type it just like the paragraph text. You can see above in the settings we have multiple different heading levels, and we can change the font if we want the heading to be italic or something like that. This actually introduces another feature, so let me add a couple more blocks. So let's add another paragraph, let's add our saved paragraph. So once you have a saved block, you can go in here and you can see they're split up into multiple categories. So we've got most used, which will actually just grab the blocks that you use most frequently. And then they're separated into normal categories, which we'll get into some of the more common ones that we think you'll use after this. And then down here at the bottom, they have the reusable ones. And then you can grab any of the paragraphs that you do. And if you hover over it, you'll see a preview of them. So we're going to add another paragraph. And then under that, we're going to add another heading. So there's a little issue right now with the scroll bar being a little funny, but
that's okay. I think it's because you're on Zoom too. It's adding to the problem.
Subheading here. So there's a really neat feature that I wanted to call out here, which is that you can see up here at the top of the screen they have this these block navigation and content structure things. So block navigation, if you click on this, it will give you sort of a list of all the blocks that you've added. And if you click on one, it'll take you directly to it so that you can edit it. And if you click on this content structure, the little I, it'll show you how many words you've used, how many headings, paragraphs, blocks, and it actually gives you a little document outline of your page. And this is really a really great feature, I think, because it lets you sort of it tries to sort of almost trick you into complying with, you know, outline sort of structure that's very good for SEO.
Yes.
Using, you know, the title of your page as the H1 and then the H2 and H3, and it'll actually show you the structure. And if you click on one, just like with the other one, it'll take you straight to it. So if you want to rearrange the structure of this subheading should actually be another just, you know, top level subheading. I can click on this H2 and it'll update it. And then if we go back, we can see it's changed there as well. So it's really good if you're trying to do, you know, fancy SEO things. You can look at this very quickly and see what the outline of your document is. And it's very good for, you know, long pages that have a lot of text, and you can make sure that it's organized in a way that's logical to you so that you'll remember, you know, all the different details of how it needs to be edited. And you'll also, it's logical to the people reading it. So another neat feature, if we click on this, so if we didn't actually need this to be a header, we just want this to be text. This is actually just text here. If you look in the top left of any block, you'll see that most of them will have something like this. It'll show the block type, and if you hover over it, it'll change to this little arrow that says change block type. You can change a lot of blocks into other types of blocks. So this is a heading, so it's easy to transform it into a paragraph. And if we click on that, it'll just get rid of the heading. Same in reverse. So if we actually want this to be a heading again, we can click that, and it'll give us a couple kinds. So if you meant to start a list, you can click on list, and it'll convert it to a list for you, which is a great segue into the list block. Essentially, it's just letting you create an ordered list really easily. So, you know, this is an unordered list, obviously. Another list item, which, you know, and it has the settings up here. So if we want it to be an ordered list, we just click on that, and it's easy to convert it back.
And you're not having to highlight.
Right. You don't have to do any fancy, you know, in the normal WordPress editor, you know, it's adding the HTML on the fly, and it's not confined to anything. So it can be kind of tricky sometimes if you like add a sub list or anything. So like I'm fairly certain I can do this is a sub item, and then right here I can just do, you know, indent, and then it's also has a sub item. And, you know, you just pick the line you want, you click on the indent, and it'll do that. You can change it back if you want to. And it seems a little strange to confine it to its own sort of like little cage, but then when you do that, it makes it much easier for an editor to make these kind of changes without having to worry about whether it's going to mess up the HTML and then look really funny when you start on it. So let's get into some other blocks. So obviously we've got our paragraph, our heading, our list. Click on common blocks. Images, you know, this one's pretty straightforward. Just click on image, and it'll give you the controls you're pretty used to from WordPress already. So we click on media library. We can just pick, you know, one of these images, nice magazine cover, and then it just puts the image. It'll let you add a caption, and then, you know, you can align it different ways, and it will let you do that pretty easily. And then on a lot of images, some widgets have more settings than others. So obviously, like paragraphs do not really have, you know, a considerable amount of settings. It's pretty much just a paragraph. It has some for, it actually has you can add a drop cap really easily, which I thought was funny. So if I want a giant V at the beginning of this paragraph, I can easily have that.
Classy looking, Joseph.
Yeah, real quick about the paragraph block. It's not just text. There's also an option for HTML. So if you have some HTML that you would like to make reusable, you could also switch to the HTML view of the paragraph block, paste it in, make it reusable, and you could use it that way as well.
Yeah, so you can do that. There's also a widget. So let's go below our image. So there's one as well for custom HTML in here somewhere. So like if you just choose this custom HTML widget, you can just paste in some HTML. And that's if you, what Jamie's talking about is like if you need to apply some HTML formatting, if you're familiar with that, to your text. Because so far the editor doesn't really have a lot, you know, in an effort to keep it simple, they've sort of limited your options a little bit. But you can go to the options and click on edit as HTML, and it'll show you that. But like, so if I wanted the second word to be superscript for some reason, you know, I can add that in HTML. But you know, obviously, if you're not comfortable with that, it's a little bit more difficult. And then if I go back to edit visually, you can see it's been changed to superscript. But yeah, it's definitely handy that you can still look at the HTML though. So we're not really gonna. Also, you know, if you need to delete an item, you can always come to this tab with your options. You click on Remove Block, and then it's gone. You can also see, I mentioned, you know, clicking on the plus sign, but if you're using a lot of the same ones, it'll sort of put them down here at the bottom right. And if you just click directly on this, so if I want another heading here, let's add an H3, this subsection. You know, it's really easy to add widgets that you frequently use. Let's go back to common blocks. You can add a file embed, which I'm not going to do right now, but it essentially just lets you pick a file and embed it on the page. Formatting, so tables.
Joseph, what if I wanted to embed a YouTube video?
So there's a whole section for embeds, and that's mostly for like third-party embeds. So like if I click on YouTube, it'll embed this widget, and it just wants to give me a URL. And give me 1 second, and I'll show you how easy that is.
When you go to YouTube, you've got the URL of the video, and then you click on the share, and there's an embed code, and that's what you're putting in, right?
No, actually,
No?
it's even easier than that.
Is it the URL now?
Yes, you can just take the URL, and WordPress has sort of had this. You know, you can just paste it into the editor, but because it's in its own like embed section, then we can easily do that. So I've got a YouTube URL, and I'm going to embed it, and then.
Wait, we can't see what you're doing.
Oh, sorry, I paused for a second. Yeah. There we go. So
wait, you gotta show us what you just did. Go back.
Sorry. I will remove our block here. Let's go back to YouTube, and because I use YouTube, it ended up in my most used, so it's really easy to just grab it again. And then I have a YouTube video that I'm just copying the URL of.
So you didn't need the embed code?
Nope, you just paste the URL in there. And then you click on embed, and then we've got our YouTube video.
And what if you want to resize it?
So you can click on edit as HTML, and it'll just show you the like embed.
So that's the usual stuff.
But this is sort of the WordPress embed, so it doesn't really give you a ton of options for resizing it. I think it sort of has a sensible default, and then if you wanted to resize it, you could either embed the embed code and change like the iframe settings, or you could potentially when creating something, if resizing YouTube videos was frequent, we could try extending the block to have settings for what size it is. I think it has, yeah, so like it has a class that, but it doesn't have, default settings for resizing. Same with other services. So like if you have a tweet or something that you wanted to embed, you can do that easily, which is something that was a little more difficult previously.
Okay, we can't see what you're doing.
Sorry, I'm just grabbing a tweet URL. And then if we go to embeds and we click on Twitter, you just paste the URL the same as you do for YouTube. And we have a picture of a spooky dog. So you can do all kinds of embeds, and most of them allow you to have captions as well. There's a huge list under embeds of the services, so we obviously don't have time to cover all of them. I haven't tested all of these, so they may work differently. Kickstarter, there's Vimeo, there's other WordPress sites, there's Facebook, Instagram, everything. Since I put it in this category, this is a good segue to talk about custom blocks.
So Joseph, define custom blocks again.
So a custom block, WordPress comes with a lot of blocks by default. All the YouTube, Twitter, almost all of these are WordPress. They come stock with WordPress. But we can also create custom blocks that do stuff that WordPress either didn't think of doing, they didn't think was worth including in core, or alternately isn't something they have access to, which is what the case is for this custom block, which is Matrix Max events. So for Matrix Max clients, we can grab events from the API and we can embed them on the page. So this one I'm going to have to preview, and I'll have to grab the URL for this. So we just put in some settings.
Yeah, and just to clarify, custom blocks, can be made available under any category of blocks, not just embeds.
And let me give you some examples of custom blocks. So if you're in WordPress and you're a Matrix Max client, you're probably familiar with the fact that we developed some code that automatically pulls in events out of Matrix Max. We've done it also for WordPress, grabbing events out of IMUS, for example, and out of NetForum. So, but one of the things that we can do in the future with Gutenberg is create these custom blocks to make it much easier for you as clients to now embed Matrix Max events onto pages without having to know any code.
Right. So that's essentially what this is doing. You can see back here in the settings it has a number of events you want to show, a message for if no events are available. And this was something that I thought was pretty neat, is it was pretty easy to have different templates just for a very specific widget. So you can see on the front end of the page here that we've got just this very simple, very basic, it's just got the event name and the little standard calendar block, which is a little different than what we have for our website here, which is where we have these special events with the different, date display and the different styles. And we created two separate templates that you can just toggle easily between. So I just changed, I want the homepage events list, and I preview it. Sometimes the preview is a little tricky. They also have this little animation while it's loading all of the stuff for your preview. And we've got a different treatment for the widget. So it's easier, and that kind of can be a little transparent to the user, but like if we're creating custom things for you, it's more, it's simpler for us to create like different treatments just for even a specific piece of content as opposed to, the page as a whole.
So if you're a Matrix Max client and a WordPress client, know that, in the coming months, we're going to be developing Gutenberg custom blocks that then we can implement on your site. And this we'll either roll it out at no charge, or it'll be, very little money to implement. Then you'll just have a lot more functionality on your site.
Yeah, so I mean, we have a couple more like this. We created this news list. By default, WordPress has like a latest post, latest comments, but it doesn't do your custom post type. So if I click on news list, I get another widget, and this has less settings because it's just content.
So
coming from
again,
WordPress.
Here to just to give you an example,
Okay.
say you've got a custom post type for member stories or a custom post type for member testimonials. Because that's not the default WordPress post, that's a custom post type, and so we create a custom block so that now they can reuse that content.
Right. So normally in WordPress, previously we'd have to create a custom widget for it. We'd have to use a separate plugin to pull it in. But now we can just create widgets for that, so that it's very easy for you as the user to have this. And even if the settings are a little more complicated, obviously this is very easy because it's just a list of news items. Then you can use the reusable blocks to save them and drop them anywhere you want on the site. So the same principle here as having different treatments for the same item is once this preview loads. So for instance, we have just, so
it's not a very good looking page, Joseph.
not so far. I've just sort of thrown everything at it. It would definitely need some work. Sometimes the preview is a little funny, which, because this isn't released yet, they're still ironing out a few little
It's
things.
perhaps why they haven't released it.
Yes. I suspect that may be the case. If I scroll down, nope, that's still just the events.
Did you actually add it?
Oh, right. So, and it published that. So did it come up? Okay. Technical difficulties a little bit there, I guess. Let me look at that and make sure it's there. Yeah. So we need to interact with it. It wants me to make sure that I'm get rid of this preview thing. Yeah, there we go. So this is just, a plain list of news items. And so we actually have a
So hang on, so go back to that page. So I actually just got a question from the chat that said, how does a news page look like with different blogs, articles where you can click on to see the full article? And I think this answers that question. So this is essentially, Joseph has added a custom block that shows the 5 news items. And if you saw in the settings for the custom block, he selected 5. So that's going to show 5, and then if he clicks into AALL news release, writer, director, John Waters, etc., then that would go into the item. There's another question, which is, can there be pictures included? And the answer is yes. Just as with everything that we have done for you in the past, or that you've done for yourself, any type of display can really have any element that you want. So if there's, Joseph, correct me if I'm wrong, if there's a featured image attached to this and the client wanted on the list of news items to have a little thumbnail of the news, then of course that could be added to the custom display of the custom block. And then if you click into the news release, it might show you a much larger version of the news release, you know, with, much larger version of the image with the content attached to the news release.
Right.
So what we're showing you in, you know, very, very quick fashion is that this is a really pretty different experience for editing the content, for managing it. It can be pretty simple if what you're doing is really just entering content the way you normally do. If what you normally do is you enter news items, you enter newsletters, you enter testimonials, you enter banner ads, etc., the experience will be different, but not hugely different. It's when you start to, you know, want to interact with these custom elements that I think the experience changes a lot. Wouldn't you agree, Jamie and Joseph?
Mm-hmm. So we have some other stuff to get to, so let me show a couple more things.
And we got to be quick because we still have slides.
So there was one more custom thing that would sort of show what was being discussed there. So on our about page here, we have this fancy sort of, you know, like index card sort of notched with the image and the text and all that. So we can create a block for this. So we have this landing page card. And so we have our test title here, and we're going to link to the About Us page. We can actually add an image, so let's add one of those images from that page. And then we can put some content. This is some content. And then if we look at that, we've updated it. Let's refresh this. You can see that, you know, with that, the way that widget is set up, you can do this like complex looking treatment very easily if we create the widget like this, and it's fairly easy for us to create the widget so that you can just put in the data and you don't have to worry about, occasionally, you know, when you have very complicated treatments, you have to put in, you know, everything in a very specific way. But this makes it easier for us to just give you the things you need to put in the content for, and then that's it, and then it'll just handle the rest for you. You know, if it's something super, super complicated, it might be a little bit more involved in that. But, you know, this to do on your own would be very difficult. But if we have a custom block that's set up to do that, it's very easy. I think that's most of, let me look at the box real quick. Oh, tables, I wanted to touch on real quick. So a table you can do very easily. It asks you how many rows and columns you want. You just put in 4 and 4. Click on
Boy,
create.
That's great, because that's a pain in the neck to do now in WordPress.
You can just tab through this.
In Word.
And it's very easy to create a table. You can also, you know, change the rows and stuff up here, so it's pretty easy. A lot of the WordPress stuff is going to work the same as previously, so like creating links is pretty much the same. This is the button thing. So this just looks like a, you know, this is their default styling of a button, but obviously if we're creating this for your site, we can make sure your site styles are attached to the button, so it's easily customizable.
So if a site had a red button or a green button or a blue button, it would be in there and they just select it. Joseph, if we were to add the custom theme colors, where would that go?
So if you look, it actually on the side here has this open already. So if I click on one of these colors, it's actually going to color the button. Now, by default, it just has all of these colors, but you know, we can customize this so that it's reduced down to the colors that you want it to be. So you won't have to remember a bunch of classes for different treatments of buttons. We'll just have the different colors here and the different text colors, and then you can sort of combine them in a way that makes sense to you, and you can just click it, and then that'll be it. So it's pretty straightforward. I think that's, oh, columns, which is kind of a big deal. So if we go to layout elements and click on columns, it'll give you, it looks a little weird at first, so it'll add in 2 spaces, just like the other ones where it says start writing or type / to choose a block. So if we click on the plus, it'll let us add, a block like we can anywhere else. So let's add our lorem ipsum paragraph, and you can see that it's divided into a column there. And let's add another one, and then we can do that. You also can change the column settings. Now, it can be a little tricky with columns because it wants you to be able to edit both of the children in it, but also the layout. So you'll just need to go in the middle here to be able to affect the columns. And then you can see on the right here, you can change it to more columns or less columns. Probably don't want 6 columns, but that's how many they'll let you do. Yeah, so it's pretty easy and straightforward, just like basically everything else. Yeah, I mean, it's a much nicer editing experience.
Joseph and Jamie, we had a question, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer. The question was, do the images auto-resize for mobile?
Yep. So when you use the image widget, actually, so anytime you upload any image into WordPress using the UI in the back end, it's actually going to take the original image, and it's also going to produce thumbnail versions of various sizes, like one that's optimized for mobile, tablet, desktop. So there's all these different thumbnail versions of the original image. So actually with WordPress is actually smarter now with the HTML they spit out for the image embed. So if you use the image widget, actually, yes, it'll resize the image on the front end, but it'll also provide, if you're on a smaller viewport, it'll provide the appropriate thumbnail version of the image, where previously that was custom coding that you'd have to implement. This happens out of the box now, so that's great.
There was also a question from Chris at AALL, which I feel obligated to answer since he was kind enough to loan us his website for our demo. Are the editing blocks limited to that width, or can they be made wider to make use of the white space on both sides, making it easier to preview how the page would look? So WordPress has sort of its default editor styles, just like it always has. But now the blocks actually have the ability to customize what they look like even in the editor as well as on the front end. So that is possible. It's definitely something that would have to be thought would have to be put into intentionally making it more previewable. But it's definitely possible, and I don't think it's very difficult. It's just something that has to be considered.
Okay, so it's part of the setting, the configuration of Gutenberg.
Yeah, I don't know about making it wider, but there's definitely thought been put into being able to make everything sort of more cleanly previewable, as opposed to previously where you just put it in the editor and then you click preview and then it might look completely different. So that's probably all the time we have for the demo. So let's go back here.
So you're probably asking, oh, there's another question. Can you justify text? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
And that's standard. That's not going away. It's available in Gutenberg. You can left, right, and center justify. So let's talk about the impact on current themes and plugins. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Joseph, Jamie, you want to address this one?
Yeah. So unfortunately, because of the open source nature, there's a lot of extensions, widgets, plugins that are not developed or maintained at all by WordPress. So, there's thousands of them really. So a lot of the most, used or popular plugins are pretty good at being, up to date, staying up to date with what's going on with WordPress. But there are some that are not maintained, that have fallen behind on upgrades and versions. So there's possibility that if you're using a very, very old plugin that hasn't been updated in maybe a couple years or even a year, a lot of changes have been made to WordPress and core. So there's the potential that, some of that functionality may not carry over into the new editor. And that's all that means.
So, but Jamie, if say a site is currently using a custom post plugin, or it's got the site origin plugin, which we've implemented, how will that interact with Gutenberg?
Right. So the front-end display of all these pages, whether it's compatible with 5.0 or not, it's not going to break. It's completely backwards compatible. Your site will continue to render and look the same way it does right now. The only thing is that, like I said, if it's an older plugin, it hasn't been maintained, updated in a long time, you may not see that functionality in the new editor anymore. But if you really, really need that functionality still, you can keep the classic editor enabled, and you'll still have access to the legacy widget functionality.
So we want to talk about the classic editor. For all of our WordPress clients, they're on what's called managed services, which means we're actually monitoring the website and we're keeping the WordPress and all the plugins up to date and making sure the site's working properly. If you are not a Matrix client and you do not have this function, please talk to us. We're happy to talk to you about managed services, even if we don't host the website. It is easy for WordPress to get out of date. We actually hear from some clients or some consultants that say, hey, we hear that WordPress is hard to host or isn't very secure, and we actually find the opposite to be true, but you've got to stay on top of the updates. But as part of our managed services, we are keeping clients on the classic editor because we know that this Gutenberg editor is a pretty big change, and what we don't want to do is just kind of spring it on you and say, surprise, here's 5.0, good luck with that. So, like I said earlier, if we're creating a new site for you, unless somebody says, hell no, we're going to put you on Gutenberg, and then you'll be on Gutenberg. But for the current sites, we're going to keep you on the classic editor until you say we're ready to switch. Next slide. Okay, so how are we going to transition your sites to Gutenberg? Some of you might be looking at this and saying, hell no, I'm going to stay with the classic editor, which we hope you won't, because we do think that Gutenberg is an improvement. There's obviously going to be some quirks. And so I've got Kevin Van Avery, who's my senior consultant, who's going to talk about some of the things that we can do for you to help you with the transition.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Couple of things I think, as Joanna just said, we can turn off the classic editor, and that is, it's a very quick little change that we can do as part of the managed services. But some of the other offerings that we have available, there's a lot of different things that we can do with Gutenberg. When we talked about, Joseph and Jamie talked about enabling the theme colors, allowing you to limit the editor to only using your theme, essentially reading your CSS file. That's a relatively small item that we can do, and we recommend that for everyone using Gutenberg. Being able to match the editor to your CSS is a big help, and just streamlines things a lot. The other one that we're recommending for most users is some training on Gutenberg. We've kind of walked through some of the big features of this, but as you can see, and as Joanna mentioned, the page we made was very much thrown together. We can do a lot more with Gutenberg given a little time and effort. We can kind of show you guys not just how to use Gutenberg, but how to use Gutenberg to make compelling, engaging content using some of the new features that are available, like columns, like inline, custom blocks. The sky's the limit in terms of some of the new ways we can publish and write content with this. And one of the things that we want to do is kind of walk through some of those options, talk to you about what you want to accomplish with your content or what you feel has been holding you back. And we can work with you not only to figure out how to solve those problems, but then show you how to do it with Gutenberg, so that you can do a lot of things that Joseph's been doing, and really bring your site up to speed on your own, using your own resources and your own staff. The other two elements are a little more nebulous. You'll notice I have create custom blocks and block templates as TBD. We haven't talked about block templates, but I think we've talked about custom blocks enough that I do want to talk about it. Custom blocks could be anything from that title card editor that Joseph showed, where it gives a thumbnail, a title text, and the gray background over the excerpt. Something like that is relatively simple to set up. We're creating a form, we're adding some custom CSS, and then packaging it all as a block. Something like that could take as few as a handful of hours. Somewhere in the our ranges for this are somewhere between 500 to, at the other end of the spectrum, something like $2,500 for a much more complicated custom block. And in that price range, we are talking about elements that are pulling custom posts, elements that may be filtering based on categories, or even blocks that allow user interaction. Blocks that will show, for instance, we showed a news feed with 5 items. And you saw how you could configure the number of items that would be displayed. For a more complex block, we could also include, for instance, a drop-down that allows you to filter by category, so that when on the front end, a user can see your news, and you can select from your categories in WordPress. And to take it even a step further, we can allow you to configure in the custom block which categories appear in the drop-down, and so on and so on. The level of complexity depends on how much dynamic functionality you want to include, how many configuration options you want to make available in the editor, and of course, the usual elements that make something complex. If it requires very specific CSS, interactive JavaScript elements, all those factor into the cost. But depending, some of these elements that we've shown here can be thrown together for a very small budget. And so yeah, there's a big range here, but none of this I think is hopefully prohibitively expensive. And we really want to give you guys the opportunity to use Gutenberg to do things like include events from your AMS, include e-commerce items from your online store. There's all sorts of options. The other element on here, and I'm going to touch on this briefly because we haven't had much chance to talk about it during the presentation, is block templates. You've seen how Joseph assembled a page using several different blocks. A block template is essentially a package of blocks, a predefined set of, for instance, a header, a paragraph, maybe an image block or an embed block for a video, and then maybe a related links block at the bottom. And that could be a template that you use for all of your posts. We can help you kind of build those templates, lock certain elements so that they're editable, and unlock certain so they're not. And this gives you ability not only to create, not only to quickly publish repeatable block content, but quickly publish repeatable page content. So that if you have, for instance, some good examples would be if you have an award that you present, once a year. So you publish it very rarely, but it's like a very complex thing where you have the name of the award, the recipient. There's more than one recipient. It changes from year to year. You can have these templates that would have all of these elements collected onto a page. It could be done for meetings. It could be done through staff directories. There's lots of places where you use repeatable page content that has the same elements over and over again. Having to drag all the blocks each time and make sure you do it the same way each time can be cumbersome. The templates allow you to basically streamline that process. And again, pricing for this ranges on the complexity. If we're just putting a header and a paragraph and an image into a template, that's very simple. That's a couple hours sort of thing. Whereas if we're making a complex page, again, there could be like a carousel and JavaScript animations, filtered interactions with content by category. The price could go up from there as well. And I think having a similar range for your expectations for pricing, somewhere between $500 and $2,500, is a good benchmark for budgeting. In both these cases, go ahead.
Let me just say this, Kevin. I know we're running out of time. Be in touch with us, and it doesn't cost you anything to say, hey, how much would it cost to do this? You can also play with this if you'd like the opportunity to do that. So be in touch with myself or be in touch with Kevin. Kevin, anything else before we go to the next slide?
I was just going to say that at the top end of that range, we're talking about elements of like real complexity and real custom functionality. Everything we've shown you so far is at the bottom of that range. These are all within the $500 elements. So just to see everything we've done here, this is really the tip of the iceberg for what you can do with Gutenberg. And at the deep end of the pool, to mix metaphors, there are really a lot of options, a lot of customization that you can offer.
And really, at the very least, like Kevin said, we recommend that you work with us to enable your theme colors and your CSS and get some training. Go ahead. I think we had we had some questions. One question was, is this responsive? And of course, yes, it'll work with your native styles and everything is responsive. Yeah. Anything to add to that?
It should work, the same way that your current theme does with regards to responsiveness. There's some features that may not, with your theme, there may be some differences with the way that Gutenberg does it, but largely they have responsiveness in mind, so it should be okay. I typed some answers, but I can address really quick. Bethany asked how it will look for posts as well as pages, because what I was editing was a page. Your current posts probably have a template, and they should work more or less the same with the new block editor, because I know that previously posts were a very simple and streamlined sort of thing, but it should work for posts. It's possible that your post template is limited in some way just because that was the previous kind of content it had. So you'd obviously want to give it a try, but it should, most of the features should work the same in posts as they do in pages. So that was the only questions that have been submitted.
Well, you know, we always end every webinar with an action plan. So here's what we recommend to you. You're probably attending this webinar because you're the main person who manages the website, or you're director level, or you're the web manager or something. Let your staff know that some type of change is coming, and let them know that you're going to have to make some decisions. You know, number 2 is decide whether or not you want to keep the classic editor or make the switch. And like we said, if you're a Matrix Group client, we're going to keep you on the classic editor. And what we can do is we can enable Gutenberg on your dev site, and then you can play with it, you know, arrange for them for some training, and then we can go ahead and make the switch. Number 3 is really do get some training. At the very least, I recommend a couple of sessions with Joseph and or Jamie, just so that you really get kind of the full benefit of Gutenberg and what it can do for you. And then number 4 is work with us to create some custom blocks and templates. I think we really touched the tip of the iceberg, or showed you just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's possible with these custom blocks. We love WordPress. We think it's a very, very good content management system, and we think that with Gutenberg, you know, a lot of this functionality that has been available with some other content management systems will now be available in WordPress. So, as always, I want to thank everyone for attending. Boy, I'm 1 minute over. There are many, many ways to get in touch with us. You have our phone number, you have our email address, and here's how you can reach us online. And we hope that you'll be in touch with us about the transition to Gutenberg. For those of you that are Matrix Group clients, and even if you're not, send me a note if you'd like to be added to the list. We will be in touch with you once we hear about the schedule for when 5.0 will be rolled out. So stay tuned. Do we have a date?
No, not yet. The latest I know is that they're releasing the second release candidate supposedly tomorrow.
Okay.
Which is they think it's getting ready and people test it. And
okay.
Then, you know.
So a release candidate is like, you know, we think this is it, but we're not sure.
Yeah, and then people poke it and then see if it breaks.
Okay. Well, again, we'd love some feedback on this webinar. So let me know if you thought this webinar was valuable, and you know how we could have done better and what we need to be doing in the future. So you all have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.